Hey there, welcome to your third and final lesson on designing for humanitarians. Now that we have heard a little bit about the foundational principles of humanitarian work and how they define success, in this lesson I will show some implications when thinking about design in this domain. First, as designers, we need to recognize that our most advanced system design perspectives have grown up largely intertwined with ideas about effectiveness for a particular type of work system, namely for-profit work. And thus, our methods for designing informational systems are deeply intertwined with assumptions about organizing, operating, and making decisions that accommodate success as defined within that particular work system. This is an important reason technology has not seen more success in the humanitarian domain. It's not easily adapted to accommodate the needs of a different work system, the humanitarian work system. So now let me highlight three specific differences in the fundamental design objectives between these two different systems. First, we'll talk about means-centered versus end-centered systems, the environment of dynamic uncertainty, and finally, bottom-up versus top-down decision-making. Means-centered versus end-centered. One way we can talk about the differences between these two systems is means-centered versus end-centered views of success of the work. The means and the ends matters for both systems. The difference lies in the weighting of these things in relation to views of effectiveness. Effectiveness in for-profit work is ultimately and legally end-centered around the primary constraint of maximizing profit and minimizing costs. It essentially focuses on achieving the bottom line. These systems tend to be more constrained to meet a particular final outcome, objectively measured, or a certain end. They enjoy more freedoms from transparency within their internal processes, those processes and the decision-making that gets them to that final outcome. However, as you learned in the previous lesson, humanitarian operations are grounded in morally accountable, means-centered views of success. It is therefore more centered around how the work is done, or the means. The processes, motivations, communications, and decision-making within those processes can all be a primary constraint in determining the success or not of any final outcome. The environment of dynamic uncertainty. One of the key attributes of humanitarian work is that of working in a highly dynamic and uncertain environment. Humanitarian emergency systems are characterized by a need to accommodate significantly higher ranges of rapid, unpredictable, and dynamic uncertainty. Humanitarian responses are subject to extensive physical destruction of infrastructure, communication pathways, logistical pathways, which further creates uncertainty in local resources. It has constantly and rapidly changing information and a whole lot of misinformation. Remember Code of Conduct 2, where humanitarians endeavor to base services on whatever the need? As such, even the final deliverable is subject to constantly changing as people and the resources to meet those needs are rapidly evolving. For-profit systems also experience uncertainty. However, they have a freedom to constrain that level of uncertainty in which they choose to operate. They choose their markets, customers, and even their routes in advance. In doing so, they enjoy more freedom in constraining the overall demand, unlike humanitarians who are meeting needs. Since the nature of humanitarian work requires a system that is built to operate under maximum uncertainty, humanitarians tend to optimize for impact by maximizing options. Whereas in a for-profit system where I'm seeking to reduce costs, I tend to optimize for a single solution where I can control things better versus top-down decision-making. Having learned what you have about the humanitarian work and its environment, its uncertainty, and in particular its desire to accommodate human rights like self-determination, bottom-up decision-making is what humanitarian work environments prefer. Let me explain it to you this way. In a traditional for-profit organization, there's a small group of informed decision-makers positioned at the top of the organization who send directives to a dispersed network of workers at the bottom. This work, in turn, supports the ultimate strategic objective. In humanitarian organizations, the triangle is inverted. There exists a small group of highly informed practitioners with the best perspective of the situation on the bottom of the triangle. The higher number of workers is situated at the top of the organization, and practitioners who are making decisions with affected communities will send requests to the top or the headquarters in order to support those decisions. In contrast to top-down models, headquarters efforts within a humanitarian system support, rather than direct, the decisions made by the field practitioners with affected communities to accomplish the organization's strategic objectives. In conclusion, the more challenging part of humanitarian work is specifically applying available resources in a highly dynamic, unstructured, and unpredictable environment while maintaining the respect of human rights, humanitarian law, and the code of conduct. In this context, effectiveness has very different qualities than seen under traditional for-profit models. Now that you know a little bit more about the unique system of objectives in the humanitarian work, the needs and the constraints that they face, you are better equipped to critically reflect on the methods, assumptions, and impacts of the design within a vastly different way. And that is the first step in preparing yourself for designing for humanitarians. Now go and design better.